So Neil, tell us about yourself.
Okay, so I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you so much. It's brilliant to see so many people that are obviously keen to find out more about Forest Church and what it can potentially do for you and people that you know. So thanks so much for coming this evening. I'm going to start actually with a quote from a gentleman called John Muir, who some of you may know, who was a 19th century Scotsman who emigrated to America as a young boy and was a key figure in the development of the national parks. And he said this. He said, "I'd rather be in the mountains thinking about God than in a church thinking about the mountains." Now, that quote for me is like an umbrella quote that encapsulates what Forest Church is about. It resonates greatly with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with you and others that you know too. So in terms of today's workshop, I'm going to build on that, and I'm going to talk about my experience of Forest Church. So this is all about my perception about it. I'm not an expert, but I've been involved in Forest Church for about 8 years now. I was first introduced to it with a day event held by my local diocese, and they brought in a guy called Bruce Stanley, and I've got his book here, and that's where it started for me back in 2013. I'm going to talk a bit about the healing power of nature and how Forest Church can take that to a high level, in my opinion. I'm going to talk about a bit what Forest Church is and is not for me, and suggest, or at least show you our structure for how we do Forest Church where I live. I'm going to talk you through an exercise in getting close to nature from the comfort of your chair. It's going to be an exercise about visualizing a beach, and I'll have a picture, and then you will go into breakout groups to talk about how that was for you. And then I shall bring you back and we'll talk about other ideas for activities, what resources might be available for you, and then take questions. And then, although we'll officially finish at 8 o'clock, many of us will be staying on longer. If you want to continue the conversation, you're very welcome to. But first, I'm going to share with you a poem that I wrote. So once a year, such is the beauty of Forest Church, only once a year do I get involved in what we would call leading Forest Church. Obviously, at the moment, it's a virtual thing. And I wrote the self-guiding notes for my group in January for last weekend, which was Candlemas and in bulk. And I wrote this poem, which really encapsulates how I feel about this time of the year. And I'm going to read it to you as almost like a setting the scene and setting the tone of this evening. I hope you have seen it. The glow of the light slowly returning, lingering 2 or 3 minutes longer every day. I hope you have heard it. The delight of the pre-dawn territory calls of the blackbirds. I hope you have sensed it. The deep and powerful stirring of nature below the ground, slowly, so slowly getting ready to appear. I hope you have touched it. The transient clouds of frost evaporating from the trees in the warmth of the morning sun. I hope you have smelt it. The memories from your childhood of what scents spring will bring. I hope you know it. The knowledge that although winter is still with us, spring is waiting patiently and slowly, almost imperceptibly, is getting ready to take to the stage. I hope you have hope that no matter how dark it might seem, the light will return. Indeed, the light is returning even as you read this, and the light will warm and feed you just as it feeds nature. So I just wrote that. I don't normally do poetry. I'm quite surprised myself. So I'm now going to go on talking about the healing power of nature. So I think we've all probably got our own experiences about what nature has done for us in the past year particularly. And it doesn't take long to find a load of examples in the press and the media about similar people sharing those experiences. So in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago, they had a section about 50 ways to stay upbeat. And number 1 was engage with nature. Over Christmas, I read Ben Fogle's book called Inspire, and he refers to wilderness as being the antidote to the complexities of modern life. And then only this week, I finally got around to reading a copy of Root and Branch, which is the magazine of A Rocha, which is a Christian environmental charity. And the issue was all about the Natural Health Service and why green is good for the mind. So I think, you know, the scientific and the personal experiences about why nature is good for us is growing all the time, and this year has just heightened that for many people. But Forest Church, I believe, can take that healing effect to a new level. So I'm just going to talk briefly about probably the strongest experience that I've had in that regard for Forest Church. So my dad died in early 2019, very suddenly, and it was the start of a very intense and busy time when grief was effectively on pause. My dad's favourite motto was organise, organise, and that's what I did. By mid-March, about 10 weeks later, I'd been busy writing letters to the solicitor, done his last tax return, and the Wednesday after that weekend, I posted those letters. On the Thursday, tiredness was really setting in. And by the Friday, that tiredness had turned into exhaustion. And I was suffering from very strange pins and needles throughout my body and heart palpitations. Basically, my body was saying enough is enough. On the Saturday morning, I managed to do the normal shopping and then took my youngest son to his Saturday school. And in the waiting area where the parents can sit in a classroom whilst they're having their lesson, I can remember being sat there and being absolutely desperate to sleep. I was just really, really wanted to crawl into a corner somewhere and go to sleep. And I can remember being there and thinking, you know, can I really go to Forest Church this afternoon? Because by then it was the spring equinox weekend. But although I knew that it felt difficult at that point, I knew it was the best thing that I could possibly do. So very fortunately, it was the gorgeous spring equinox day, around the 23rd of March. And we were gathering to this Forest Church in a large grassy field, about the size of a football pitch, surrounded by different aged woodland. And at this point, spring was emerging. And the theme of that session, that Forest Church meeting, was the Lectio Divina, which I'm sure some of you will know is a contemplative way of reading the Bible. So we met and gathered and we did the initial reading, and there was various readings and maybe a song. And then we went to do what is the key thing for us of Forest Church, which is what's called a sit spot. And I walked around the field and I found a place on the edge of the field, just underneath some very young woodland. And rather than sitting, I lay down because I was still very tired after the last few days. And I just spent half an hour by myself, concentrated on my breathing, and took some time to rest with my thoughts and with God, in the sun and the warmth, with birdsong, the blossom on the trees coming out. It was just a magical afternoon. And we regathered after that session, and then suddenly, well, not suddenly, but gradually I realized I felt utterly different. And it's impossible for me to explain the contrast between the intense tiredness I felt that morning, and then after Forest Church, I was like back to normal. It was amazing. And so that's what Forest Church has done for me, and Forest Church is such an important part of my life and of my expression of my faith. So why is there a need for Forest Church? So what is Forest Church for me, and what is it not? So why is there a need for Forest Church? Well, I think there's two people I'm going to refer to here. So again, some of you might know Thomas Berry. He wrote a review in a book where he said this. He said, "It has been said that we will not save what we do not love. It is also true that we will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred." I just think that's a beautiful way of putting it, really. Experiencing nature and with a sacred intent in your mind is a way of taking your appreciation of it to a new level. And then recently, I mean, this Christmas, I'm now reading a book called, by John Mark Comer, called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And as its title suggests, it's focusing all about how the modern life involves a sense of hurry and speed that's really not healthy for us. And just on Monday night, I was reading in the book where he reminds us that Jesus would often retreat to the wilderness to be closer to God. And indeed, he notes in the Gospel of Luke that Jesus did this 9 times. And of course, most famously, he did so the night before his crucifixion in the Garden of Gethsemane. So those two, that quote and that observation from John Mark Comer's book said to me why there is a need for Forest Church. And therefore, for me, this is primarily an opportunity to do something that's about a deeper connection with nature and the seasons, a chance to learn about my heritage in the British Isles. And for me, particularly pre-pandemic, it was a regular time to stop, really stop in mindful wonder at what's around all through the seasons and sensing my place in the world and my relationship with God. And as with any good gathering, it also involves finishing with sharing food and experiences with people that I've grown to know well and love over the last few years. So in terms of, pause for a moment, in terms of what it is and is not for me, moving on from there. So a forest is optional. It's called Forest Church, or we're talking about it as Forest Church, but basically any piece of nature deserves our attention. And Bruce Stanley, who wrote the book, which I'm going to refer to later, says, all you need to set up a forest church is a group of people and some nature. It's that simple, really. I suggest that you try not to see it as just a church service that you do outside. It's an opportunity to do something really different that's going to engage different people or engage people in a different way. It's not necessarily overtly Christian, but it could be. And I love, there's a Green Christian produced an annual thing called The Storm of Hope, an annual publication. And on page 2 of that, they say, it says, one of the greatest strengths of the Green Christian is that we walk alongside with people of all faiths and those who we feel, and those who feel they have no need of faith. So I really see Forest Church as a chance to engage with everybody who has a shared sense of how precious our natural world is. For me, that's the primary thing. And then within Forest Church, you can draw on any shared spiritual faith or otherwise connection with what you're in. And the beauty of Forest Church, absolutely beauty of it, is in its simplicity. So I also go to a church around the corner from where I live. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with church services that can have substantial rotas for who's doing the service, who's reading, who's preaching, etc., etc. Forest Church, basically, when we do it, there's just one person that's organising it, leading it, and it means that I only get involved in leading it once a year. And it means the rest of the time I can be what I will call a user. I'm there to experience Forest Church and not just lead it. And again, Bruce Stanley, in his book, Forest Church, says that, just to reaffirm that, he says, your style of Forest Church can be unique. There isn't a prescribed model. So again, just reaffirming that although I'm talking tonight about my experience, your choices means that your Forest Church, if you set one up, will be unique. So I'm just going to take a moment to have a drink of water. So next slide, please, Staffan. Thank you. So what we do is we will basically gather somewhere safely in a piece of nature. The word forest, you can replace that with beach, you can replace it with meadow, any piece of nature where you can safely gather is a good piece of nature. We normally first go around, we might stand in a circle and we'll do a process of checking in with each other. So introducing who we are, saying how we are today, maybe what word best summarizes how we feel at this moment. And then whoever's leading it will often then introduce the session to explain the particular theme. So often in our Forest Church, we will choose our dates to piggyback on predominantly Christian festivals, but also definitely make reference to other non-Christian festivals in the British Isles. So there will always be a theme to the session. And then we'll typically sit down wherever we can comfortably, and there might be a reading, there might be a song, there might be some sort of mindfulness exercise. That can be, it varies from person to person. Every leader brings their own unique interpretation. And then I think the most valuable bit is what we call a sit spot. And this, when we do it, can be sort of 30, 40, maybe a little bit more minutes, where we would basically wander off where we are and go and have a bit of private time exploring the location we're in, and as its name suggests, finding somewhere that we can safely sit and just observe nature. And the really important thing about that part is that it really is about, you know, being present with where you are in that location and trying to hone in on your senses and what you're seeing and what you're smelling around you. And that was the magical thing for me on that Forest Church a couple of years ago, when I felt just utterly transformed. Then we'll come back to our group and we'll be some sort of sharing what we noticed and how we felt. People can speak, they don't have to speak. We just sort of, and that can go on for 3 minutes or 10 minutes. And then we'll, there'll probably be some sort of reading again, perhaps another song, and then some sort of blessing, some sort of closing comments on the day. And then the really enjoyable bit as well of food, drink, and catching up. It's like a bring and share picnic, basically. And I might add that we'll do this in all weathers. The most sort of one of the most memorable Forest churches for me was a couple of years ago when I led it one September afternoon, and it was chucking it down with rain. We were in a woodland. It wasn't windy, but it was raining, and it's amazing to be in a woodland when it's raining and to not stay indoors, to go into a woodland when it's raining. And that was amazing. We stayed, you know, we did the Forest Church, we had our food in the pouring rain, but it was really special to do that. So that's an overview of how we would do our gatherings. And we're now going to move on. If Stefan, if you can move to the next slide, please. So I've spoken twice about this concept of a sit spot. Once when I was on that hillside, and I've just mentioned it in the previous possible structure of a gathering. So now we're going to invite you to take part in an exercise in getting close to nature, but from your own seat. Wherever you are, you're very welcome to turn your camera off. All I'm going to be asking you to do is to just close your eyes, and I'm going to talk you through an exercise. So Stefan, if you have the next slide, please. So this is a beach that is very special to me. It's near Bridport in Dorset. I went to a lovely retreat centre called Athona about 4 years ago now. It was March. I'd never been there before. And I went down the day I arrived. I arrived about 4 o'clock. It was early March. Sunset's about 6:30, and I went down to the beach. And this was the sea that I saw, and it was just beautiful. So what I would like you to do is to look at that beach, and perhaps you've been there, perhaps you know one that's really similar to you. But I just want you to take just 10 seconds just to really, really, really look at that picture from the top to the bottom, to the left and to the right. So now I'd like you to close your eyes, if you would please. And imagine that you're sat on that beach, on the pebbles. Can you feel the pebbles underneath your body? Do you feel comfortable, or is it uncomfortable? Are they cold? Can you feel, are they wet? Can you feel the wind in your face? Can you feel the energy of the waves as they crash down onto the beach and the energy reverberates through your body? Can you feel the warmth of that dying sun as it sets? Can you see those milky clouds on the horizon? Can you see how intense the sun is, even at this time of day, at this time of year? Can you see the energy and the froth of the waves as they crash on the shore just 10 foot in front of you? If you look down where you're sat, can you see the pebbles beneath you? How tiny they are and how unique everyone is. In the horizon, can you see the distant ship as it makes its way onto an unknown destination? Can you hear those waves crashing down like a heartbeat? Can you hear the seagulls above you calling as they travel past? Can you hear the wind whistling in your ears? Can you smell just how clean that air is? Just how beautifully clean the air is? Can you taste the salt of the spray as it crashes up and moves onto your lips? Just a few moments longer, just rest in your senses, exploring everything that you can see, feel, smell, taste. Now open your eyes and come back to the room. So what we're going to do now is that Staffan and Barbara are going to very kindly get back into another breakout room. And it's just an opportunity for you to share with the people in the room with you, how was that for you? Did it work for you? Did it not work for you? But just share your thoughts about how that was for you. Could you feel yourself on that beach? So Staffan, over to you.
Right. Well, what would be great now is just to stick into the chat. Why don't you just put a couple of words into the chat? So in terms of, first of all, how you felt about that very brief session that we did. Let's have a look at the chat just for a minute or two, see what it says.
I'm just going to type the quote from Thomas Berry that Daniel asked whilst those thoughts are going into there. But I love the single word thing. That's often what we do in Forest Church. We just say just a word that describes how you feel. Powerful to join with the rest of life moving on. Awe and wonder, absolutely. And sleepy. I know. I know if I'm asked to close my eyes for 5 minutes, there's definitely a distinct chance I'm going to go to sleep wherever I am. It was lovely in my breakout group to talk about, you know, people's own experiences of beaches, and I felt pretty sure that it would resonate some personal reflections from people of beaches that they know and have experienced, from the volcanic beaches of Mallorca to I don't know, I can't remember where Daniel was, but I think it was UK. So I'm glad it was easy to engage with this, even with shutting your eyes. And that's, I suppose, my point in doing the exercise, even from your own chair, is that if you try and sort of, you know how you feel during that exercise, and it will obviously be different for lots of you, but when you're actually on a beach and you really engage with your senses for half an hour, the ability to really just cut out the noise from your life is can be very strong. It's always, you know, it depends on your individual circumstances at the time, but I'm pleased that the comments that are coming through, and just imagine what it's like in a woodland or by a beach.
So can I suggest that maybe someone has a thought or a particular thing they'd like to share or ask you? So stick your hand up and I'll try and skip screens and find you. You know, particularly they'd like to, Neil.
Keith Judson's got his hand up, Stefan.
Ah, dear Mr. Judson. Okay, you need to go on unmute, Keith.
I keep forgetting that because I've most of the Zoom meetings I'm leading. Yeah, Neil, I'm interested in the exploration of Forest Church with people who don't subscribe to a Christian faith, and particularly if you have experience of doing that in a way which enables them to feel just as much a part of things as the Christians, as opposed to feeling like the Christians are there to try to persuade them to join their faith.
I mean, so we've done various Forest Church sessions where we've had, I remember there was a couple that came once, he was Christian and she was pagan, and they came along, and it was utterly lovely that she felt able to come along. There was, years ago, there was a guy that used to come along with his kids. I believe they were of no faith. We don't ask people what their faith is, and we try and keep the language as faith neutral as possible. Sometimes, you know, it's not always possible. If we're doing the theme is Lectio Divina, then you know it's unavoidable. We've had previous themes where someone's led on St. Francis, so it's unavoidable. But even then, what is the commonality between us all is our absolute desire to engage with nature and to explore our own spirituality or faith, whatever that is. So I think, you know, because it's not in a church as well, it's not in a building with four walls, it might feel easier for people to engage with it for that reason as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Brilliant. Who else? Yeah. Okay, I can see Hilary Ash. If you unmute yourself and share with us, that would be great.
Our Forest Church, we've been doing 3 or 4 a year for about 3 years now. Works a little bit differently to Neil's. We do it anywhere. Our own church grounds are fairly limited, so we've used nature reserves, we've used country parks, usually public, although not always. We did the first one in private. Thought we'd make fools of ourselves in private first time. We actually share the leading, so there were different people doing readings, doing leading songs. We've got several musicians in the group, so we always have music. And one of them's good at writing prayers. We'll use a Celtic blessing said all together as a finisher normally. We prefer to do that way, have a small group that plans it. One of our group is John Barnett, who's on the call tonight. He's a retired Methodist minister and has been invaluable in helping plan it. We do, rather than having the sit and thing that Neil does, which is an interesting idea, we'll try that. Our usual thing has been to have 4 or 5 prayer points spread around the area, done as A4 sheets of paper, laminated and tied to a fence or a bush or whatever, so we can just take them away at the end. And people are invited by themselves or in twos or in a small group, depending on where we are, what we're doing, and to just walk around those at their own pace and use those as inspirations to prayer. We did the 5 senses one time, we've done the fruits of the spirit one time, and you know, whatever's doing. And we have a little leaflet, just 2 sides of A4, because that gives us the words of the hymns and the words of the Celtic blessing to say together, and anything else we need to know. So
thank you
that's
very
the sort
much.
of way we do it.
Jackie Phillips, can we go to Jackie?
It was really just a simple question. Do you think Forest Church puts people off the
Yeah.
word church?
We've had discussions about do we need to drop the word church. When one of the links I'll give you the first web link, it talks about Forest Church being centered in Christ, and I I see it as a perhaps a form of I don't know if outreach is the word, but I want to engage with people of my faith and all faiths. And yes, the word church might put some people off, but I think if you have a personal relationship with people, and if you know people and you invite people that you can maybe use that as an opportunity to deal with any concerns they might have about, is this a church service, and and deal with it that way, Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. It just really expanded my vision of Forest Church with the way you've spoken about it. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well, we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more, but let's just take one more. Is there any one person before we talk about resources that would like to just raise an issue? Anne Scott.
Hi, yeah, just to say that we've done some Forest Church sessions in a woodland. I do Forest School, that's my job, I'm a Forest School teacher. And so being blessed to have that land to use it on. And I've found it just wonderful to do as families. So it's sort of intergenerational rather than just having adults, although there are some times where it is good just to have adults, so you can have those sit spot times without being pestered. But yeah, just invaluable to have space for kids. They can create with the natural materials. We've had whole groups making big crosses, and just having that those natural materials to work with as well has just been absolutely beautiful.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, well, we'll have some more time later for those of you who want to keep going. Neil, it would be great if you could share just a little bit about resources and activities. So let me put the screen share on again.
Last slide on.
Here we go.
My deck. Oh no, the penultimate one. Yeah, sorry. Yes, activities first. Yeah, so the sit spot. There's a whole range of things you can do, and I'll come to a book I've spoken about that can give you more ideas. There's plenty of books available these days, particularly in the last couple of years, to give you ideas. And the lady just spoke about Forest School as being an inspiration. So the sit spot is the one I've spoken about a lot. You could do things like a meditation on a seed or a leaf. I'm always astounded at the beauty that is in the detail. My last Forest Church, there was just 4 of us in September, and I was sat with a magnifying glass looking at a bramble leaf, and it is beautiful. So you can do a meditation on a seed or a leaf. We sometimes do a thing about counting sounds to get people to shut their eyes and just to, as a group, and to just in their own mind count the number of different sounds that they can hear. There's something called owl eyes and hawk eyes, which is basically what can you see nearby and what can you see further away. And again, it's just about spending time to focus on one sense. And then deer ears is another one where we tell people be stood up facing a particular direction and cup your ears one way, what can you hear? Cup your ears the other way, what can you hear? There's a raft of other options. I mean, plenty of people on this call have got other experiences of what they do. Some of the resources I'm going to mention can give you further ideas for what other things that you can do. So then the last slide then, Staffan, is then sort of to bring this thing towards a close, is the resources that are available to you, and this is just a small snapshot of them. So the first one, the Mystic Christ website, for me, from what I can see, it's got resources on it, plenty of resources, but also gives you a sense of existing Forest churches that are out there and are probably, I think, open to new members if you want to explore maybe with one that exists close to where you are. My key reference point, particularly at the start, was this book called Forest Church by Bruce Stanley. So Bruce led my first experience of Forest Church, which was an amazing experience one June evening. This is a really, really good book. I have used it for years, but less so now because I feel confident. But it's got sections in it like, it touches on the why do Forest Church, but it also talks about example activities. There's 48 pages of example activities. And he also touches upon some of the practical considerations you might want to think about, like risk assessments, like do you need to think about insurance, like what do you do about children, etc., etc. So this book, and there are others, but I've read this one, and Bruce led my group. That's a really good book. Another person earlier spoke about having a Celtic blessing as part of the service. So The Celtic Wheel of the Year by Tess Ward. This is a beautiful book. This really helps in terms of engaging with the seasons and the historical festivals of the British Isles. So it's divided into the 12 months of the year, and each month there's, I don't know, half a dozen pages to talk about, well, what are the festivals in February, you know, and what's the history behind those festivals. And then also for each month there are 7 days worth of readings, blessings, and often those 7 days for the month are tuned into a particular festival that was spoken about in the book itself. And indeed Tess was a member of our Forest Church at the very, very start, but she's moved to Northumbria now. That's a very, very good book. The Song of the Wheel. So this is what we use for our songs. So this is, it's called Chants for the Forest Church Year from the Ancient Arden Forest Church. So on the web link I've put there, you can listen to samples of the song, okay? And it might be for you. They're not traditional hymns. They are more, I don't know how to describe them actually. They're ancient songs which have a more sort of Celtic, very low-level Christian feel to them, but they're very good as chants to sing in a loop. Very good with a guitar, acoustic guitar. So that's a good book to listen to, a good one to explore and see if it's right for you. I've put this book called A Time for Creation. I've not actually got that, but I know it's named, as it suggests, is focus on creation. There's a whole set of liturgy and readings to do with that. Water, Wind, Earth and Fire. This is a lovely book. As its name suggests, perhaps to some, there's a certain tone of St. Francis about it. There's Contemplative Fire. I came across these people at Greenbelt a couple of years ago. Have a look on their website. For me, I would call it a form of Forest Church. They have various groups throughout the country. And there are many, many more books and resources out there. So that is just a snapshot of the things that mainly the things that I've used or encountered that I thought would be of relevance. So we have, where are we going next? Let me just check my notes momentarily.
Well, I mean, Neil, we're going to close in a prayer in a couple of minutes to let people disappear at 8 o'clock. Our key commitment is to keep you for an hour only. But before we did that, and before you just lead that, I just wonder if you look at some of the cracking questions that have been coming through on the chat, which I'm glad that you have to answer, not me. And maybe you could talk us through some of those. You know, once Leslie Hickson asked, is there a defined dividing line between rejoicing in creation and worshipping creation itself?
Yeah, and I'm not a theologian, but is that the word pantheism that is, someone might nod, or that there can be a fine line, but I mean, I go into nature to rejoice creation. Other people might have a different approach in their mind. I mean, you know, I'm doing what I'm doing as a Christian in church, and we potentially bring together people of all faiths and no faith potentially. So I don't know what they might do.
And Marion Kenyon has talked about in their church they have a labyrinth.
Yes, we've done that. Yes, we've done that, and that's a beautiful. We create one and then do like a prayer walk within the labyrinth. Really, really, really slowly walking around the labyrinth, and that's a really lovely thing to do as well. I agree. Any others? Any other comments you want me to draw attention to, Staffan?
Well, there's some really good comments within the text, and I think we've probably just about done it, and a good time to let people go. I think it's important to let people go back to their family, their evenings. But if you want to stay on with a bit less people on and just chat with Neil, that would be great. You'll be very welcome to stick around. So why don't you, Neil, bring us to just a close?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm really grateful that you've come and joined with us this evening to hear about Forest Church. So thank you very much for your time. I believe that Forest Church is there for those who, like John Muir, would rather be in the mountains and thinking about God than in a church thinking about the mountains. And if you agree with Thomas Berry that you will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred, then I wish you well with your own exploration about Forest Church and how it can help you to engage with God in nature and to engage with other people in your community. And I'm just going to leave with a closing prayer. So I wrote this again for the Candlemas Forest Church that I led remotely. So this was designed to be led just after dawn has broken, and then I would have spent 30 minutes or so watching the dawn rise wherever I was. We would have watched collectively the light emerge for us. So this is just a final prayer for us tonight. So thank you for your time, and do stay on afterwards if you'd like to chat some more. God of all light, help me to keep the light of this day in my heart for all time. Help me to be the light in the darkest moments. Help me to share the light and its joy with those I meet today. Amen. And take care, everybody. Thank you much for your time today.
Amen. And Neil, we'd really like to thank you so much for sharing this with us and the time and effort you put into it. Thank you on behalf of Green Christian.